Coming up, Indianapolis has earned a reputation as a sports capital and built an industry around the business of sports. But how did it pull off the improbable, hosting the entirety of March Madness? Indiana Sports Corporation President Ryan Vaughn joins us with a special look at how Indy and Indiana were made for this moment. Plus, he has led one of the nation's great urban universities since 2015. Now, IUPUI Chancellor Nasser Paydar is retiring. He joins us to talk accomplishments and what's next. Plus,
I'm Rachel Redmond in Fishers, a post-COVID progress report on Indiana co-working spaces, plus a look at the state's first test kitchen at the end of year 2. I catch up with one of Indiana's biggest forces in tech, John WECHSLER, coming up.
Details on those stories and much more ahead on this edition of Inside Indiana Business. Hello and welcome to Inside Indiana Business. I'm Gerry. Well, for decades, Indianapolis has been a model for hosting some of the biggest sporting events in the world. And when the world shut down for the COVID-19 pandemic, city and state leaders and volunteers took on perhaps the biggest sports challenge of all, hosting the entire 2021 NCAA Division I men's basketball tournament, March Madness. The stakes were high, and the eyes of the world were on Indiana. And a behind-the-scenes documentary is providing an exclusive look at how Indy and Indiana pulled it off and were indeed made for this moment. The Indiana Sports Corporation has just debuted the documentary, and I'm pleased to be joined by Indiana Sports Corporation President Ryan Vaughn with more on what really was a seminal moment for the sports movement. Ryan, as always, thanks for joining us.
Oh, so glad to be with you.
Hey, first of all, why do this? Why do this documentary? It's very well done. I've seen most of it, very well produced. Why put this together?
You know, we actually started this documentary before COVID. It was an effort to capture kind of our rich history and the impact that our mission has had on our community. You know, sports have certainly helped shape both the economics and the geography of our city and state. And so we wanted to tell that story. And about halfway through it, of course, the world changed. It presented a really unique opportunity to turn the lens from a broader story about the impact of sports to this very unique moment that quite literally we were built for.
Yeah, and part of this story too, which I think is very important, is building up to how Indianapolis and Indiana became made for this moment. Going back to the 1982 Sports Festival, the 87 Pan Am Games, so a lot of historical content in there as well.
Yeah, no, it's a really great summary. In fact, you know, even members of our own staff who were young and maybe not around at those times have learned a great deal just by sitting down and watching it. It's a great civic lesson about what we can accomplish when we all work together, put our minds towards something, and what great impact we can have on our community. Yeah,
and the world, as you said, did change with the pandemic, and it really began, the dominoes began to fall, if you will, at the 2020 Big Ten tournament in downtown Indianapolis. Here's a clip from the documentary that kind of captures the sense of urgency as the pandemic shut things down.
I remember being in a room and seeing the Bankers Life Fieldhouse leadership run past, and I thought to myself, this is bad. I mean, we had heard about what was happening in the NBA and we had heard about what had happened at other events, but it was happening at our event, and that's what made all the difference. And I think that's when reality really hit.
The next day, you know, day 2 of the tournament, and there were a lot of things being discussed, and it was literally 10 minutes before the doors are supposed to open, and then it's 5 minutes before the doors are supposed to open.
Then eventually it was like, all right, we're gonna hold the doors and not let people in.
And then the Big Ten shuts down. Then the NCAA shuts down. And then the world shuts down. You know, we were all living by the seat of our pants at that point.
So sports, basketball, sports shut down at that point or shortly thereafter. And you get a call a little bit later in the year, Ryan, from the NCAA saying they're considering doing the tournament in 2021 at one location. What was your thought process when you got that call?
Well, I was really excited. I mean, we knew that the 2021 Final Four, which was already scheduled to be in Indy, was going to be kind of a waking up moment for our community. We knew how important it was going to be to invite people back downtown, to sort of restart our tourism economy in that way. And so to have not only the opportunity to host those 4 games, but potentially be able to host the entire tournament along with it, we knew would be a once in a lifetime extraordinary moment in a time when, as you've noted, Indianapolis certainly needed it.
Yeah, Indy pulled it off. How did it happen? We're going to go in depth on this in the second half hour of the show. But the logistical, I think Mark Emmert from the NCAA said outside of the Olympics, he can't imagine any other event with more challenges from a hosting standpoint. What was it like doing it? How did it happen?
Well, I think what the documentary shows is that but for that 40-year history of partnerships and experience and relationship building and process building, quite frankly, I'm not sure we would have been ready to pull it off. But we had that great history. We had those relationships. And, the thing that sets this community apart, and I really believe this, is how quickly we all work together when we put our mind to something. And so we were literally just phone calls away from partners to rally together and put our best foot forward. And, thanks to the community of volunteers and the leadership at the state and the city and the CIB, Visit Indy, and we were able to do it.
Hey, we have to be quick on this one, but obviously there was economic impact to the city and the state for that. But in terms of what this message that it sent to big conventions and big events and others around the country, around the globe, considering locating, how big of a factor did Indy's performance play, to those constituents?
It was huge. My peers around the country called and congratulated us when it was done. And in the course of those conversations, I became aware of just how much permission it had given them in their own communities to start taking risk and opening back up.
Yeah, very good. Well, we're much more with Ryan Vaughn and some other special guests in the second half hour of our show. Ryan, thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you a little bit later in the show.
Thank you, Gerry.
All right. Well, hey, no matter what the next major sporting event to land in Indy just might be, Mark Miles, he'll probably have a hand in planning it. He's my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Miles is now a key executive at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the CEO of Penske Entertainment, but his track record of successfully pulling off big events in Indianapolis goes way back. It's a resume that includes serving as president of the organizing body for the '87 Pan Am Games in Indianapolis, 15 years leading professional tennis, also heading up the 2012 Super Bowl host committee. He says the next big thing in Indianapolis, well, maybe a global golf event.
I don't think I'd be interested in just having a regular PGA Tour event.
Right.
So who knows, maybe somebody else sitting in this seat in the future could capitalize on an opportunity we could build over time to make a huge impact, not necessarily on the oval.
Yeah, maybe at the Brickyard. We'll see about that. Much more with Mark Miles, including a fascinating story related to the Pan Am Games and an up-close and personal encounter with Fidel Castro. That's in the Business and Beyond podcast. To check it out, go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. It's time now for Eye on Education. Well, he has held leadership roles at Indiana University for more than 3 decades, including positions at Indiana University, Purdue University, Columbus, IU East, and IUPUI. Now, after nearly 7 years as chancellor at IUPUI, Nasser Paydar is retiring, and I'm pleased to welcome him back to the show. IUPUI's retiring chancellor, Nasser Paydar. Nasser, as always, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Gerry. Delighted to be with you.
Yeah, you have led IUPUI since 2015, but your roles at Indiana University go back 36 and a half years. You've been with the university a long time. Came here as a professor, right, from New York. We were talking off camera before we started. You really didn't necessarily envision the path you took when you got here 36 years ago.
Yes, Gerry, I came here for faculty in mechanical engineering. It's been a pleasure to be in Indianapolis all these times, as well as Columbus and Richmond, and part of this wonderful university and its terrific campus. IUPUI right here at the heart of Indianapolis.
You know, you have led the university again since 2015, but obviously being in the state, being at Indiana University, you've been able to witness how IUPUI has grown into this great urban university. Give us your perspective on the growth and the trajectory, you know, what has happened at IUPUI right here in the heart of Indianapolis.
Well, since I started here, IUPUI has really dramatically increased. Number of faculty has increased significantly, but more importantly, number of students. We have roughly 30,000 students now at IUPUI, outstanding students at that. And 91% of the students come from state of Indiana, and roughly the same percentage stay in Indiana, which is really remarkable, right here in our own wonderful state.
Yeah, I know you've made a real point of that as we talk about that talent pipeline, which is so important. How many graduates and not only get their education at IUPUI, but go to work here, and many of them stay here in Indiana.
Gary, we graduated over 8,000 students last year in 1 year. Wow. And of these, those that stay here, majority are even in Indianapolis and the rest of the state. We have more students, or alumni, I should say, from IUPUI right here in this city than IU Bloomington and Purdue University West Lafayette combined.
Wow.
So wow. There is, because students really come from here, and the programs that we have, Gary, as you know, we have the only dental school in the state of Indiana right here. We have a large school of medicine right here on our campus, but we have other programs that attract students here and keeps them right here in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, I know you can point to a number of things, but in terms of accomplishments and what perhaps you're most proud of or you'd like to be remembered for, can you point to something in particular?
I think, you know, the reason the universities exist is to admit students, but to graduate them. So graduation rate have doubled in the last 6 or 7 years, the 4-year graduation. I'm very proud of that. The other thing is that at IUPUI, we want diverse student body. Mm-hmm. So we've had student body from all backgrounds here. The incoming students this fall, 40% of them were students of color. Wow. And that is terrific, because we want to have diverse student body come here and graduate.
Yeah, the footprint, the presence of IUPUI has certainly changed dramatically over the years, including under your watch. It's an economic driver too. IUPUI for Central Indiana and the state of Indiana is a huge economic impact that comes from the university.
Absolutely, there was a study done by the economic impact of the IUPUI, and it was determined not only we have huge number of alumni that work here, not just the payroll that we provide here, but the businesses that we create for the city. 1 in 44 jobs in Central Indiana connected to IUPUI. So the impact is enormous.
Well, the impact that you have had, we're watching a funny video there of you playing some table tennis on there, but the impact you have had, Nasser, on the university has been substantial, and on Indianapolis and the state. So thank you for that, and best of luck in that next chapter.
Thank you very much, Gerry.
All right. Well, a positive ripple effect from the pandemic, the growing demand for co-working space at places like Launch Fishers. Our Mary Rachel Redmond with details from Hamilton County in this week's Around Indiana. Here's what's making news now around Indiana. Well, as we quickly approach the 2-year mark of the pandemic, there's no question businesses of all sizes have taken a hit. And Indiana's co-working space is no different. But in Hamilton County, all signs point to a bright future ahead. Our Mary Rachel Redmond caught up with tech trailblazer John WECHSLER at our satellite studio in Launch Fishers for the latest. Mary Rachel.
Well, Gary, perhaps one of the bright spots to emerge out of the pandemic is the surge in entrepreneurs and startups across the country, but especially in Indiana. And look no further than one of the state's first and largest co-working spaces housed in Hamilton County, Launch Fishers. John WECHSLER, one of the original co-founders of Launch, tells me the work from anywhere model was already in the works before COVID-19 hit, but the pandemic accelerated the model over the last 2 years, and it's had nothing but a positive effect on not only Launch Fishers, but co-working spaces statewide.
The work from anywhere model, the remote worker model, is really benefiting the co-work locations around the state. We're seeing opportunities for people that may work for a company that's based in New York or California, for the workers to be right here in Fishers or in Indianapolis and work right here from Launch Fishers or one of the other state's co-working centers. So we had a period of time where everything was basically shut down, and then as we returned back to work with measures in place to make sure that the environment was safe and that everybody stayed healthy, what we found is a new comfort level as people have learned how to kind of work together and and refill the space. We're seeing levels of work that we haven't seen in years. That's been pretty amazing to see. And at this point, the Launch Fishers location and IoT lab, both here in Fishers, are full. So we're at the point where we're really trying to make room for people and plan for longer term. How do we meet that demand?
While there's no question the restaurant industry has perhaps been hit the hardest due to COVID-19 restrictions, WECHSLER tells me the Fishers Test Kitchen is thriving.
Amazing time to start a restaurant, let alone multiple restaurants at the Fishers Test Kitchen. We walked right into the pandemic, and we made it through that moment in time. And as of right now, they are at pre-pandemic levels in terms of revenue and business there at the Test Kitchen. So we're really excited to see what the future holds over at the Sun King tasting room with the Fishers Test Kitchen.
And WECHSLER also points out this year marks the 10-year anniversary of Launch Fishers opening its doors in 2012.
10 years ago, when Mayor Fadness and I were dreaming up what we were going to do with Launch Fishers, we were in the basement of the library at the time. Today, you fast forward 10 years, and we've seen thousands of jobs created, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in Fishers and our startup community. We're in 52,000 square feet here at Launch Fishers and another 26,000 for the IoT lab. And really, this has kind of exceeded our wildest expectations after a decade of doing this.
WECHSLER tells me fostering that entrepreneurial spirit and push for innovation is really at the heart of Fishers' continued growth. In fact, since the early days of the pandemic, the city's tech and innovation district has seen the addition of several new companies, perhaps the most exciting of which is predicted to be a major disruptor in the building construction space. I'll have an exclusive report on this revolutionary technology in concrete building called Bolt-to-Block in the coming weeks. Gary?
All right, Mary Rachel, thank you. Also making headlines this week around Indiana, CIMTECH announced it is expanding in New Albany. The precision manufacturer says it will invest $2.3 million over the next decade to add about 14,000 square feet of space and a small number of jobs. CIMTECH provides CNC machining and turning, engineering, and wire forming for the automotive, medical, and aerospace industries. CIMTECH currently employs about 40 in New Albany. And 4 more vendors coming to Union Street Market at Electric Works in downtown Fort Wayne. The addition of Narrow Road Farm, Brooks Barbecue and Chicken, Holy Ladle, and the Charlie Horse Bar brings the total number of restaurants and food vendors to 12. Union Street Market, the indoor food market, on track to open in October as part of the $286 million first phase of the mixed-use innovation district at a former General Electric campus. Well, the makeover at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in downtown Indianapolis isn't all about bricks and mortar. See how the beauty of art is coming to life at the Fieldhouse of the future. Well, if you want to get the scoop on what's happening around Indianapolis or the best places to eat or grab drinks, there's a new e-newsletter from our partners at the IBJ. After Hours will be your weekly source for news you can use when you're not on the clock. And I'm pleased to welcome to the show renowned arts and entertainment reporter Dave Lindquist with more on what you'll find in the newsletter. And Dave, thanks for joining us from the IBJ newsroom.
Thank you, Gerry.
Hey, well, okay, tell us what After Hours, brand new e-newsletter, what it's all about.
I started at the Indianapolis Business Journal in October, and they gave me this like invigorating beat that's a hybrid of retail news, restaurants, and what I've done for many years, arts and entertainment coverage. And it's a lot of fun to write about all those things. And this new email newsletter kind of combines it with a little heavier emphasis on arts and entertainment and pop culture.
Yeah, and I know you always have scoops too, so you can look for some breaking news in those newsletters as well. Hey, in this first newsletter, you've got an interesting mix of stories, including a number of really cool murals that are going to be going up as part of that massive makeover at Gainbridge Fieldhouse.
Yes, Pacer Sports and Entertainment and the CIB, which owns the Fieldhouse, partnered with the Indy Arts Council to commission more than 20 new pieces of art. In the lower suite level corridor, there are going to be some framed pieces that are like nice textures. You can look at them real close. And also on the main concourse and the balcony concourse are some larger murals. And the concept, kind of coming from CEO Rick Fuson, is to tell the story of basketball in Indiana, the Indiana Pacers themselves, the Fever, and that building, which has been around since 1999 and has hosted a lot more than just basketball.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting to see. Plus, the one that really interests me, this is an amazing story. Mad Men star John Hamm portraying former WIBC legendary newsman Fred Heckman and playing out the Tony Kuritzis case essentially on a podcast.
Yeah, that one just kind of rolled up this week that Amazon Studios, in addition to all their other filmed entertainment, they're also in podcasts. One of their original podcasts is something called American Hostage. And they're telling the story, one of the more bizarre, chilling hostage stories in the 20th century, as far as I'm concerned, when Tony Kuritzis held his mortgage banker hostage on a wire and a shotgun for several days. And this story is told on this podcast from the perspective of Fred Heckman, who, kind of a larger-than-life character.
Absolutely. Hey, real quick, Dave, you've also got an interesting story for the print edition of IBJ on GANGGANG'S diversity initiative in downtown.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share this story. In 2020, GANGGANG formed as a cultural development firm, kind of a startup, not in tech, but in kind of the cultural and creative arts. It's led by Molly Jeffers and Alan Bacon, and this new initiative is placing 3 Black-owned businesses in downtown. So. They always lead with, like I said, cultural and creative ideas. And the 3 businesses are a streetwear company called Nap or Nothing, a pizzeria called The Missing Brick, and a media company called Media. And I think you probably had all those people on with you.
Yep, absolutely. Hey, Dave, great, and congrats on the new e-newsletter. After hours, we'll be looking for it. Dave Lindquist from the IBJ. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
All right. Well, ahead in our next half hour, a deeper dive into the playbook that helped catapult Indianapolis into a global sports powerhouse. More on the documentary made for this moment.
Pride of understanding that we were going to be the start of something that was going to be bigger for the entire country.
Community pride pretty much sums it up. It took a village for Indianapolis to pull off the improbable, hosting the entirety of March Madness last year. Now, the city and its cadre of event organizers, medical experts, volunteers had already been planning to host the NCAA Men's Final Four in 2021, but not the entire tournament. The pandemic changed the game plan, and college basketball looked to the city that crowns champions, and Indianapolis responded in a big way.
For the last 40 years, Indianapolis has put athletes at the forefront.
It's part of our DNA, it's part of our ethos.
Sports has put Indianapolis on the map and made us known.
And that's in large part tied to the Indiana Sports Corps and the work they've done through decades.
They were the first in the country to think strategically about what does sports bring to us? What can we use sports for to promote our community? Nobody else does that.
The Sports Corporation's handprint is everywhere, and that's one of the things that I think is a little bit invisible in the community. Nobody really knows how all this gets done.
And these events don't happen without hours of pre-planning and what-ifs.
A lot of people just take for granted what goes into large events. Fortunately, we here in Indianapolis and throughout the state of Indiana, folks know how to pull off large events.
I hope when we talk about the 2021 March Madness that people realize just how complex it was.
There were so many elements that went into housing a 68-team tournament in a time of a pandemic.
I can't think of anything short of the Olympics that would be more complex than what we just did.
We had to rethink the event from the start.
We had transportation, we had operations, we had air travel, we had COVID testing.
I must admit, I held my breath because you just felt that there was something gonna blow up.
There was this moment of like, can they really do it?
If this tournament is not played, the future of college athletics was at stake here.
We'll look back on March Madness as those weeks when Indianapolis really led the nation.
This is what the Sports Corp is made for, to do the impossible, to do the event. I don't know of another town in the country that could have pulled this off.
That clip from a behind-the-scenes documentary just being released, made for this moment, which looks at how it all came together. And I'm pleased to be joined by Indiana Sports Corporation President Ryan Vaughn, rejoined. We had him on earlier in the shows, who spent the final 30 minutes of the show this week looking at how it all happened and the impact and what's next. Ryan, you heard some of the comments there. And I think it was Mr. Mark Emmert from the NCAA, who talked about the future of basketball. I mean, there was so much riding on this. Was there a level of pressure that was felt here in Indianapolis to pull this event off?
Yeah, it was certainly a heavy responsibility. First, thank you to the NCAA for trusting this community with that, immense opportunity. But, I think most people know and appreciate that as it relates to college sports, particularly the NCAA, men's college basketball is the event that funds a variety of other sports. And so if that doesn't happen, if for a second year in a row those revenues don't materialize, you're looking at colleges and universities across the country having to slash athletic budgets and programs and opportunities for kids.
I think you could also make the argument, obviously sports is big business for Indianapolis and more broadly, increasingly for Indiana as well. You don't pull this off, and the impact on the city's great reputation stands to be perhaps damaged as well.
Yeah, there was certainly reputational risk if something were to go poorly or, we weren't able to properly work with health officials and design an effective bubble. But to be perfectly candid, I never really struggled with that risk. I was more focused on, how much the city and the state needed us to be successful, how much the NCAA needed us to be successful. And I had all the faith in the world and the community that, has developed that reputation over 40 years to come together and get it done.
Looking back on it now, and I think there was just one team, I think it was VCU, as we talked about off camera, that had to leave because of issues. How did you pull it off? There were so many complexities. You essentially created a bubble, right, downtown Indianapolis.
Yeah, you connected our hotels to the convention center. We built 12 courts in the convention center for practice. You developed complex movement and transportation plans to and from buses and different venues. Remember, we're playing, especially in the first and second rounds, as far away as Lafayette and Bloomington, and then multiple venues in Indianapolis. So it takes an immense planning effort. The NCAA was extraordinary. Marion County Health, State Health Department, incredible. I think at one point in time, we numbered it up. We did over 600 police escorts to and from practices and games in a matter of 3 weeks. So wow. It really does take everyone coming together.
We have another clip with folks reacting to Indianapolis as the job Indianapolis did, and Virginia Keene was in this one. You mentioned the medical piece. Let's roll that piece of tape.
I have not, in my career, worked with a city where people take such pride, and I would even say they're a little competitive on making sure that Indy does it better than anyone else. And that's not typically true in all cities.
I can't think of another event that's going to throw more at them than we just did. You know, I'm serious. I mean, I can't think of anything short of the Olympics that would be more complex than what we just did.
Nobody else is going to be able to duplicate what we did in Indianapolis based on collaboration, based on success, and less than 1% any spread of COVID-19 as a result of this tournament. Now, who can beat that?
Yeah, great point there. How about the medical piece? Because obviously that's a huge piece of this story, Ryan. The testing and all the things that went into that. How challenging was that?
Well, I think you could see from that clip just how much of an extraordinary leader Dr. Kane is. I mean, if you take yourself back in that time, it would have been very easy for her to say, no, we can't get it done. But she knew how important it was for the community, and she worked with us tirelessly to get it done. And so, you know, a lot of credit goes to IU Health and the NCAA for working out all the protocols and testing inside the bubble. And then outside the bubble was a whole separate testing for every venue and staff and employee that was going in there. And so we had to have, you know, multiple providers communicating on common platforms, scheduling all of these workers. The folks at GPace Labs did an extraordinary job helping us out. It really was a logistical challenge like none other we faced.
I know everything didn't go perfectly. Give us, we talked about one example of how logistically things didn't necessarily always go according to Hoy.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is nothing ever goes perfectly in these major events, but this one, you know, planning all of this activity in less than 60 days, we knew some things were going to go wrong, but probably the one that I think is the most comical now that we look back on it is, you know, we had so much effort and energy had to go into doing laundry for especially those first 10 days when you've got 68 teams, NCAA staff, volunteers, literally confined to their hotel rooms. And Lowe's was able to deliver 2 trucks that had washers and dryers inside of them. Literally minutes before we needed to start doing all this laundry. And as the second one backs up and we open it looking to see washers and dryers, all we see are showers. They'd accidentally sent the wrong truck. And so immediately our logistical supply chain there was cut in half. And, you know, but Lowe's rallied. They sent another truck from a different state, and we were able to play catch up with a little help from friends outside the bubble. But things like that always pop up, and people rally to make it work.
Yeah, great story, and you're good to mention too. Of course, Bloomington and West Lafayette and the hosting job those communities did as well. So Ryan, hang on there. We're going to come back to you in a few moments to continue the conversation. But still ahead, more on why Indianapolis was made for this moment. How Larry Bird's drive in an Indy car in the streets of Manhattan, part of the winning formula for the city, landing its next big thing. Stay with us.
Larry Bird, Indy car, Fifth Avenue.
Who could forget that scene on the streets of Manhattan in 2017? Indiana basketball legend Larry Bird delivering Indianapolis's bid to host the 2021 NBA All-Star Game behind the wheel of an Indy car. Well, it worked. The NBA said yes to Indianapolis for the 2021 event. COVID had other plans, though. But just because the COVID pandemic postponed Indianapolis's NBA All-Star Game from 2021 to 24 does not mean the host committee has put plans on hold. Quite the contrary. Bill Benner has more in this week's Inside Indiana Sports. Bill.
Gary, thanks. And indeed, in addition to continuing to fund and implement the legacy projects throughout the state, representatives of the host committee were in Cleveland last week observing and taking notes of all-star activities, mostly those off the court. And joining us today to offer some of the learning that took place, we welcome back Mel Raines, president of the 2024 All-Star Host Committee, as well as president and COO of Pacers Sports and Entertainment. And Mel, we welcome you back to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Bill.
Well, and I know you didn't personally go to Cleveland. You have so much other things on your very full plate. But talk about the delegation that did go to Cleveland and some of the things that they brought back.
Absolutely. So we had a group of 4 people specifically who went to scout out the All-Star game for 2024. And then we had a smaller group supporting our players who were participating in the events happening in Cleveland. And they had an absolutely fantastic time. Cleveland did a great job as a host city, as you would expect. And I think it reinforces that cities that are northern cities can do a great job this time of year, as well as cities that are in the southern part of the country. And there was a lot to learn. It certainly was a very different All-Star game. There were still a lot of COVID protocols and different alterations that they made. And it was very focused on the 75th anniversary of the NBA. And ours will obviously not be as focused on that theme. But we're incredibly excited for 24. It helped energize us to get things going again here.
How is the additional time, and again, we all wish that the game would have taken place on schedule in 2021, but how has the additional time been a benefit?
It's a huge benefit, actually. When we bid in 2017, we were contemplating renovations to the field house, but we hadn't had the final deal points made. And so now that we're 2/3 of the way through the renovation, we'll be completely done. In about a year, hopefully, with everything, including the plaza. And so having the entire building renovated, Gainbridge Fieldhouse will never look better than it will by the fall of this year. And then the plaza completed, I think, adds a huge element to All-Star Weekend.
And Mel, we mentioned the legacy projects, and another benefit of the additional time, you went from 21 to 24 of these activities.
Yeah, so we've already completed the 21 projects, but we're going to add 3 more to take us to 2024, and we'll be talking about what those look like soon. We've got our board meeting in about 3 weeks, and then we're also going to add a new class of 24 rising stars. So we had named 21 rising stars, high school seniors in the class of 21 that were affiliated with the legacy projects. We'll add a whole new class of 24 and hopefully involve all 45 of those young people in some way in All-Star Weekend 2024.
Mel, we got about a minute left. We've talked about the Sports Corp, Indiana Sports Corporation unveiled its Made for This Moment documentary Wednesday night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. It is a spectacular, really well done thing that captures the sports initiative from the beginning through now. But again, and it was brought up in the documentary, and you played a huge role in the Super Bowl in 2012. A lot of people say, what's next? So Mel Raines, what's next?
Good question. I learned a lot watching that documentary. I would say once we survive 49 games in the next 34 days here in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, we'll be focused on that. But I think the future is incredibly bright. The new hotel that we have coming online, the renovation of our building and the new plaza that can be a part of a lot of the new events. There's so much on the landscape. I think coming out of COVID, everybody knows how much sports galvanize the country in so many ways. And I think we're really well positioned to continue to bid and win these big events.
Well, Mel, we certainly appreciate you being on the program, and we look forward to 2024 All-Star Weekend, much, much more than the game. President of the host committee, and thanks for being on.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, see you soon. And Gerry, back to you.
All right, Bill, thank you. Well, one of the key figures in putting Indiana on the global sports map, native son, Indianapolis born and bred Mark Miles, now a driving force behind IndyCar, the world's greatest spectacle in racing. He is my guest on the next Business and Beyond podcast. Miles played a major role back in the 80s in helping Indianapolis land the Pan American Games. The city won the bid to host over Cuba, which didn't sit very well with Cuban dictator Fidel Castro, who threatened to boycott the games. So Miles and other Pan Am organizers flew to Havana to try to negotiate a deal with Castro to reconsider.
And I was the last one in our group to turn the corner, and there's Fidel in the full green fatigues and the hat, bigger than life. And when he gets to me or I get to him, he says, "You're very young to have this responsibility." And of course, I'd read everything I could get my hands on about him.
Yeah.
So I said, well, actually, when you successfully won the revolution and took Havana, you were 60 days younger than I am now. And he just lit up. I mean,
touche,
scored a point, I think, at that point.
Many more great stories like that one from Mark Miles, my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. To check it out, just go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com and click on the subscribe tab. Hosting the 87 Pan American Games and many, many other big sporting events after that, prepared the city to roll out the red carpet for this biggie.
With Super Bowl 46 in Indianapolis in 2012, we were center stage. All eyes were on Indiana.
More on how Indianapolis was made for this moment and the key players who've carried the ball to help make it all happen when we come back.
In 1987, I do solemnly proclaim open the 10th Pan American Games in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the United States of America.
What a moment that was. The Vice President of the United States standing on the front straightaway of the world's most famous race course, propelling Indianapolis onto the international spotlight in a huge way. But it wouldn't be the last. The 87 Pan American Games would serve as the entree for the city, hosting a smorgasbord of big sporting events. For more on how Indy has evolved into a big event city and what might be next, pleased to be joined again by Indiana Sports Corporation President Ryan Vaughn, also Inside Indiana Sports contributor Bill Benner, and a pioneer in the Indy sports movement, the first Indiana Sports Corporation president, Sandy Knapp, coming to us from just outside of Austin, Texas. Welcome, one and all.
Thank you, Gerry.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have Ryan, the current president, but Sandy, president number one of the first local sports commission, right, in the United States. 1979, I think, was when that all came about. Talk about, Sandy, your perspective, thinking back to those early days and the development of Indianapolis as a sports capital and how it all came together.
Well, Gerry, I think in the beginning it was a lot of smoke and mirrors, because they're really, I don't think there was anybody that could have anticipated that 40 years later Indianapolis would have morphed into the wonderful city it is, and that the sports movement would have had such a meaningful role in that transformation. In January of 1980, Sue Ross, my secretary, and I moved into the lobby of the Hyatt Regency in basically retail space. And our biggest challenge was trying to conduct business while they had a tea dance. So that's the early days. And the sophistication, the polish, just everything about Ryan and his crew and what they've accomplished is just, it's just remarkable.
And Ryan, during the documentary, former Sports Corp board chair and current Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swarbrick, instrumental in all of this, talks about the franchise that Indianapolis has become through sports. And what's it like now to be in charge of that franchise?
Yeah, hey, before, Bill, because we have that clip, let's roll that clip, and then we'll have Ryan respond. Here's Jack Swarbrick from Notre Dame.
It is absolutely critical never to lose a franchise, and that's what this is. It's a franchise. New York doesn't have debates about whether to maintain Broadway or Wall Street. It is so hard to get a franchise, and when you get one, you need to maintain it and keep it.
A person once told me, dance with the one that brung you, and the one that brung us was sport, and I will always be committed to dancing with the one that brung me.
I mean, we're not done. We're starting a new run. That's exciting for me as I come in the waning years of my career to see that we're going to leave it better than where we had it. I know that's cliche, but I think we are leaving Indianapolis in terms of many of these things better than where we started with it.
Yeah, Ryan, that's the clip I referred to. Just amplify on that. And like I said, you're now in charge of that franchise.
I actually thought it was one of the most salient points in the entire documentary. Jack's obviously a tremendous leader, but his sort of ability to see how important that is to a community. It's really its brand, what it's known for, and that's who we are. And it's a great honor to be the current steward of that great mission, but it's also a heavy honor. I mean, you look at the accomplishments of all the folks that have come before, and it's your job not only to sustain but to help grow and evolve it. And it's a challenge I and my team and the board accept. And it's great to be supported by people like Sandy and those that have come before us who continually encourage us and provide us insights and help and how we grow.
Yeah, I know, Ryan, you're getting peppered with those questions. Hey, what's next? Sandy, I'd be interested in your perspective, your long history and connection to Indianapolis. People wonder, what does Indiana do to stay kind of ahead of the curve? I know there's a big announcement recently about the NBA 2K League coming here to Indianapolis. That's a big event. As you look at it, what do you think Indianapolis should consider as it considers, extending that franchise, extending that sports brand?
I'm not sure I can name a specific event. I think that what Indianapolis has done a really magnificent job of is really identifying events that are good fits for our city. I think, there are a lot of events out there. Not all of them are going to be successful, and not all of them are really going to contribute to the brand.
Yeah. Hey, also real quick, as I looked at this old tape of the National Sports Festival, which I think we're looking at there in this Pan Am game, you forget, or I did anyway, how mammoth those events were, how complex those events were, and that's in the infancy of Indianapolis as a sports capital. Sandy, as you think back on pulling those events off, you got to be prideful about it, but are you amazed too a little bit?
Well, totally amazed, but also, I complained a lot about not having enough lead time to stage the games, and I decided just to stop whining about that ever again after I saw what Vaughn and his crew had to do with the final, the whole NCAA tournament. I mean, it pales by comparison. So I think part of the difference, though, is that when you're building something, the energy level and the excitement is it's just different than when you in the later stages, as we now are with the sports initiative.
Yeah. Ryan, one of my takeaways from the documentary, I said immediately after, I said, you need to take this and put it in front of anybody that wants to bring a convention, a sporting event, whatever it might be. They need to see a synthesized version of this, because it really underscores this, again, using Jack's words, the franchise that we've created here.
Yeah, I think that's right. And honestly, it's part of the intent behind creating the documentary initially. Certainly we wanted to capture all the history. We wanted to capture the moment of March Madness, but we also need to continually find new ways to tell our story and to stay atop of that very competitive industry, which is attracting events. And so this was a great way to do that. Very generous gift by our former board chair, Scott Dorsey, to, one, recognize that need, but then step up and help us accomplish that as he stepped down from his chairmanship.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead, Sandy.
I think it's also a tool that can help the next generation understand how we got to where we are, because if you don't remember how you got to where you are, oftentimes you can slide back. And so, and you can take for granted how great everything is now. Well, it wasn't always that way. So I think it's also going to be a tool that can be used. I know when I was talking to Conrad Picarillo at Innovative Edit, I said, how's it going to be distributed? Because that was my major concern, was the next generation.
Yeah, I think that is a great point, and either one of you can answer or try to answer this one. But again, Indiana Sports Corporation, the first local sports commission. Now there are probably hundreds around the country at various sizes and cities and states and regions. What's been the secret sauce of Indianapolis? It's one thing to get to a high level, but to maintain that level over a consistent long period of time is pretty incredible. What's been the key? I know volunteers and leadership, but how do you sustain that going forward?
Well, for me, it's been the people, and it's been the people regardless of their political party, whether they're local elected officials or state elected officials, who all realize how important and impactful it has been, and how necessary it is to keep this mission sort of above the fray. We're not out chasing controversial major events like a political convention. We're focused on events that bring the community together, that lift us all up, and that have that tremendous economic impact and really reflect our genuine Hoosier hospitality and who we are. And as long as we stay dedicated to that and people continue to believe in our mission, I think we'll continue to be successful.
I think there's another sort of immeasurable component, and that is success breeds success. And as Indianapolis continues to deliver, it just sets the foundation that much further ahead. You know, I mean, if we'd had a bunch of bombs, which knock on wood, has not had a lot of bombs, I think the story would be different. But success breeds success, and people want to be a part of something that's fun and exciting and successful.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Sandy Knapp, the very first president of the Indiana Sports Corporation. Ryan Vaughn, the current president of the Sports Corporation. Great perspective on a sports movement, and also a great documentary. Thank you to you both.
Thank you, Gary.
All right. Bill, thank you as well. We'll see you next week, and we'll be right back after this. Coming up next week, more basketball, the business of basketball coming to Indianapolis. Plus, our Mary Rachel Redmond will take us to Mishawaka, where efforts to save the historic Cam and Schellinger Brewery are underway. Well, thanks for joining us this week on a special edition of our show as we look at the importance of the business of sports. The Made in This Moment documentary that was released this week by the Indiana Sports Corporation, chronicling how Indianapolis hosted the entirety of March Madness. Also, a big shout out to the very creative and talented folks at Innovative Edit for putting that documentary together.